you are the co-founding member of the Missouri Coalition Against Common Core. So you flew here from Missouri?
I did.
What city do you live in?
Springfield.
Springfield, the holy city?
In the Bible Belt.
Got it, okay. And you have your master's in education in instructional design and a doctorate in special education from Teachers College, Columbia University. It's very impressive. You've spent the last 35 years in education. Your first 10 years as a special educator teaching all grade levels from parent-infant programs all the way through K-12. So you're going to provide us with a breadth and depth of knowledge on education and what's happening with Common Core and the rest. And we are really excited that you were able to fly here from Missouri to join us and looking forward to your comments. Thank you very much. Welcome.
My doctorate is from Teachers College at Columbia University, and I only mention that because here in California you have the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium with Linda Darling Hammond at the helm. Linda Darling Hammond and I were at Teachers College at the same time, and so was Bill Ayers, but I am their nemesis. It's important to be coordinated, so I did that. So I'm going to talk about 3 themes, and you'll find it in your brochures as well. The organizers of the conference wanted us to give you 3 takeaways: the way it was, how it changed, and the way it is, and how to fix it. So I've organized the PowerPoint in those 3 themes, and I want to begin at the beginning, which is what Genesis means. So we'll start with the way it was. The story begins at the Genesis. And the reason I bring this up is because one of the fundamental books of literature that our founders did learn from, not just in the churches, but in the schools, was the Bible. It was a textbook. And when I speak with my Jewish friend from Israel, he tells me that that is how they teach history in Israel, because that is their history, the Old Testament. And so the fact that that is being suppressed, even as a classic piece of literature, is an abomination, not just to people of faith, but to people of intelligence. Because you can't understand the allusions in American novels and literature unless you know the parts of the Bible they come from. You can't understand Shakespeare unless you understand that he is actually using quotes. When he says, neither borrower nor lender be, he's quoting from the Proverbs, okay? And so these are magnificent statements of wisdom about how to live in the plays of Shakespeare, but he actually took them from the scriptures. If we rob our children of that heritage, of that classic piece of literature, we are dumbing down. And so it's not teaching religion to be teaching the Bible, it is also teaching religion. So I show you these parts of Scripture as parts of good literature so that you understand the stories of the Scripture and what the stories were meant to tell you about the human heart. That's what great literature does. It gives you wisdom and values and morals, whether or not you believe them as a Christian or as a Jewish person, because it is just wisdom. And our founders knew that, so I want to get onto this. Unfortunately, I did not get to see the text in the slides prior to coming here, so I understand that it might not be as visible as possible. So I'm going to read to you the texts I've picked out to show you the contrast. What's going on in American schools is a conflict between Judeo-Christian faith that they learn at home and in schools, if they are coming out of the heritage of American history, in conflict with humanism, which is being taught. Humanism, if you go to the UNESCO website, humanism is the goal of education through UNESCO because they believe that's what's going to bring world peace. You will no longer have conflicts of religious values if everybody believes the same thing. So the question is, what did God say about humanism? Because it's in there, if you know how to read it. And it begins at the beginning. It begins in Genesis, and this is where it starts. if you look at Genesis versus the Greek philosophers, now mind you that the Old Testament is written at about 1000 BC. And then Plato's Republic is written at about 400 BC. So you see, God's wisdom was first expressed in that great literature, the Old Testament. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So they're distinct but equal in the image of God. And he told them to settle the land. Okay, do you see how this is juxtaposed to humanism, where you have no business being here, your footprint needs to be as small as possible, and you're equivalent to animals? All right? So this is my favorite line. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And now if you go back into Genesis and you look at what he does each day, he says God looked at it and saw it was good. But after he created man, he said, it is very good because it's in my image. All right? Then the serpent comes. Now God had planted liberty available for people to choose right from the Garden of Eden. This is in the story. The tree of liberty is that tree from which the apple, I mean, that's the way the artist depicted. It doesn't really say apple in the scripture, so don't hold me to that. But the whole point is, the tree is there because you have a choice. That's liberty. You always have a choice. It doesn't mean freedom from conflict. Liberty means conflict, and you must choose sides. Okay? And what God said, don't choose death, choose life. But what the serpent said was, you will not die. You will be like God. So God is trying to keep something from you here, okay? I'm going to tell you the truth. You will be like God. Now, do you see that's the first deception? So that when we get all bent out of shape because unscrupulous and unethical people use fear and smear to silence us, they are only following their father of lies, which set up the whole deception game in the book of Genesis. But you have to know the Bible, and you have to know Genesis to understand you will not get rid of this with a bill. You will not get rid of this by a change in the elections in your government. You are immersed in the human story which began in the book of Genesis. All right? That means you are, just like this baton passer says, you are part of the link, but that story started a long time ago. Whether or not you pass the truth on to the next generation really depends on you. But you have a choice. So the Lord God banished him from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from the land which he had been taken. To work the ground from the land which he had been taken. So what God is getting at is learn that you're the created, not the creator. Put yourself in right relationship with God, all right? He's the one who's all-powerful. You are the created. It was his pleasure to make you for friendship. But make no mistake, you're not equal. And you don't make a very good God, all right? Now, know that the Greek philosophers then knew about all of these ideas that were percolating that would actually elevate man to the status of a god. But to do that, you had to explain how man got there in the first place. So we have Anaximander, who introduced the theory of spontaneous generation, Diogenes, who introduced the concept of primordial slime, Empedocles, who introduced the theory of survival of the fittest and natural selection, Democritus advocated the mutual ability and adaptation of species, and Lucretius announced that all life sprang from Mother Earth. Does that sound familiar? Do you understand Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun? All right? And that Darwin didn't have an original idea in his head. All right? So here's the point. When you contrast the stories in Genesis with the philosophies of the Greek, you either believe in the Creator or you're a slime-swimming elitist. All right, now slime swimming elitists believe that in the evolution, there will be people at different stages of development, and the people at the highest stage should be running your government. Do you get that? You are lower in their strata of classification, and therefore you need to be taken care of. Does it sound familiar? This is humanism, folks. This is humanism. And it was told to you right there in the book of Genesis that you would be engaged in this struggle. So it continues when Cain builds the city of Enoch. There are several Enochs in the Bible. This was the first one. When Cain killed his brother, God wanted to make sure that he understood he had done wrong. And he said, you know, you're going to wander the rest of your life. And Cain said, I will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, and so that no one finding him would slay him. Then Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Do you know who wrote that book, East of Eden? An American novelist, John Steinbeck. Do you understand the title unless you understand Genesis? All right? East of Eden is a land of restlessness where you will never find peace. And Cain said to God, you know, God offered him a protection that said, okay, I'm going to punish you, but I will also protect you. And Cain said, well, thanks for that, but no thanks. I will be my own God. I will build a city of man. And that's why when you hear Black Robe Regiment pastor, whose name escapes me right now. No, it wasn't. It was the person who arrived with the Puritans. But he described the city on the hill that actually came from the book of Genesis when Abraham was looking outside of his tents to see the goal that God had in mind, which was the city of God. So Genesis constantly sets up this dichotomy between living in the city of God and living in the city of man. Cain sets up the city of man, and he's going to name the city after his son Enoch. Do you see that's how he becomes eternal? Okay? So Psalm 49 says, for he sees that even wise men die, the stupid and the senseless alike perish and leave their wealth to others. Their inner thought is that their houses are forever and their dwelling places to all generations. They have called their lands after their own names, but man in his pomp will not endure. See, God's got your number. Okay, so humanists, you know, you can exercise futility or you can make it right with your Creator, get in right relationship. That's what this story is about. So my favorite story here regarding Common Core then is the Tower of Babel, because it talks of standardization. Man in his hubris of bringing these cities of men together and building them needs standardization in his system. And he says, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly and use brick for stone. God made natural stone in different shapes and sizes, like individual people. But man can't tolerate that. He needs precision, and he's going to standardize by building bricks. Got it? All right, and they use tar for mortar. So the person writing the story knows exactly what it means to use appropriate building material. Mortar is stable, will hold things in place. Tar in the heat is going to slide, and your building is going to do what? It's going to destabilize. So they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city. At that time, a city is a city-state. All right, so it's a form of centralized government where God's people were out meeting him in the wilderness, Man was insulating himself with his own contraptions. Got it? We're not different. We're not different than the characters in the stories of Genesis. And that is my point. Don't think that we are abandoned by God. God sent us a Savior after these stories were written to redeem the world. He doesn't save his Son and have him die in the manner he died and then walk away from us. We walked away from him. So we have to get back in right relationship for God to heal us. Okay, and that's going to come a little bit later. But I want you to understand these stories as literature so that you understand the parallels and the symbolism going on here. So the tower whose top will reach heaven, do you understand? You want to become a god, is utopia. Let us make for ourselves a name. That's how you have all these billionaires in the news controlling your government, right? They're using their money that way. I've got 1 minute left, I'm told. I was originally told I had 45, so I do have 45. Okay, she's going to run this 15-minute thing 3 times then. You got it? All right. So Israel rejects the rule of God. Israel is no different than Cain. This is when Samuel the prophet is just grieving because he's going to be the last prophet. This is what the king, and he goes to God and he says, they're rejecting you, or they're rejecting me, and God says, no, they're rejecting me. But before I give them a king, let me tell you what the kings will do, and warn them first, because he always does that. He always gives us a choice. Here's what they will do. The king will reign over you, will claim his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of the chariots. In other words, draft for the military. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, centralized government. You get it? That's what they're now calling progressive federalism. They're actually turning your state capitals into nodes of power from Washington, D.C., rather than maintaining the structure of the Republic of Republics, separate governments under a larger protected government. Okay. So, and to others will plow the ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olives and give them to his attendants. That's cronyism. He will take 1/10 of your grain vintage and give them to his officials and attendants. He'll use your taxes to pay off his supporters, right? Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys he will take for his own use. Live a lavish lifestyle. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. He'll take your personal wealth. He'll redistribute your wealth and freedom. All right? Here's what Proverbs has to say then. The government is not responsible for your children's education. The parents are. That's what local control was all about. And it says so in the scriptures, and the Puritans knew it. In Proverbs 1:8, it says, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. But we have a generation raised up thinking they go to work while the government educates the children. All right? So listen, my sons, to a father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding. I give you sound learning, so you do not forsake my teaching. Give wisdom and get understanding. This is not workforce development. Okay? You were to get a liberal arts education so that you understood morality and virtue and leadership. Liberal arts gives you that. All right? You were to get the wisdom of the Proverbs and the Psalms so that you understood what it said about government, even in the book of Exodus. The Hebrew Republic is described in Exodus 20. And that was a model used for the formation of our republic. But you won't find that in the social studies books. Proverbs 22:6, then, parents, train up your child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So, if you yourself wasn't the teacher, at least you should have control of your local school district through your school boards. But in centralized government, what they are doing is usurping that local control, moving it up to the state level, and even removing state decision-making so that it is centralized from Washington, D.C. That's what the copyright and the Common Core State Standards is about. It is a private product used for public policy. And that means it is totally out of your hands. That is the quintessential hallmark of this centralized system, the copyright. I do not go into the weeds, although I can. Trust me, there's enough wrong with the content of the Common Core Standards. We could debate that all day. But the key that you have to know is it is not just a transformation of content, it's a transformation to your government system because of the copyright. Now, they say they're protecting the copyright writers, but what it does is it is linked to the assessments. So you got the input from the standards and your output there on your test scores. These tests are linked to the standards via the SBAC agreement with your state. That means it's a closed system, and your school districts will be determined whether they are credited or not on the test scores from these tests. So they've got the whole thing figured out. It's in different pieces, but if you know where to look, it's there. And trust me, they are taking away local control so that parents no longer have input. Oh, they want you there to help educate according to their agenda. But that's what this is about. This is from Plato's Republic. Plato set up academies. And I want you to appreciate this because it's got the descriptors of Common Core in it. In both the Republic and the Laws, Plato identifies education as one of the most important aspects of a healthy state. Now, this isn't for wisdom and understanding of the individuals and knowledge of God. This is for the state's economy, all right? He lays out detailed education programs that start with exercises for pregnant women that they should perform to ensure the health of the unborn child. There is a YouTube post of a Superintendent Saxon from Oregon saying P in P20 means prenatal, because they want to know that the mother is taking care of the unborn child for the good of the state, okay? Goes on to explain not only that children should study, but what values the children should study. I guarantee there were no pastors on the Common Core content development team, okay? One can achieve only so much by arguing with the corrupt soul with a virtuous life is better. Instead, Plato recognizes the need to teach children from a young age. He actually says this. Plato thinks that children's education is the last thing that should be left to chance or parental whim. What he's after is standardization, just the way the Tower of Babel was after standardization. Then what they will do is have an observation laboratory in these academies where children are challenged with certain activities. You will have observers determine which children show propensity for the values valued by the state. All right, and then they will be selected to go into government. That is exactly what the guardians of Plato's Republic are selected to do. Now, what you should appreciate is that Plato's Republic was the first political document explaining a utopian government. He had these academies to teach his philosophy and his ways. They died out, they were closed, but then there was a resurrection. That's what the Renaissance is. It's a resurrection of the classical studies. Plato's academies were resurrected in the 1400s, and consistent with that were the seven liberal arts. The seven liberal arts were liberty arts, and what they included was grammar, rhetoric, logic, and a study of history. Okay? So the liberal arts were reserved for those people who would be in the government class. They were the aristocracy. Then you had the servile arts, and they would be the craftsmen, the workers. In other words, the people who served under the aristocracy. But what you had in this class system then was an understanding that was actually precipitated by John Wycliffe's writing of the Bible in English. All right, he's the Morning Star. He's the one that translated the Bible from Latin into English. And of course, the Pope didn't want him to do that because there's all kinds of stuff about people being, you know, equal in the priesthood under God, and it was just going to get messy, so don't do it, John. But he did it anyway. And when that happened, handwritten Bibles were circulated through the grassroots. That's exactly what's going on now. Information was circulated through the grassroots, and it was causing controversy. Eventually what happened, when you had a bad king, you had nobles who were wanting to limit the bad king's influence on the government, and that gave birth to the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta then was limiting the king's power, but the Mayflower Compact, and mind you, the Puritans were seditionists, okay? The king did not want them reading the Bible because, again, there was all kinds of things about liberty and republics, and there certainly was not a handing down of the crown through the bloodline, not at all. And the king didn't want the people to know that. So the Puritans then were actually breaking the law to read the Bible in secret. They go to Leyden, Holland, right? And who do they meet there? But the Jews that were expelled from Spain. And that's where they came in contact with the Mishnah Torah. And that's where they learned Exodus is not just a book of faith, it's a political document that describes a government. And so the Puritans couldn't go back to be living under a king. Andrew and I were talking last night. I'm Mary Margaret. My mother is from the O'Connell clan. All right? And my family came over here in the 1700s. We're part of the Irish diaspora. That's how we look at it. We are from a tribal background. My O'Connell clan is still very much alive, and we celebrate each other because we know what it is to be part of family. And the Puritans, when they came over, came in their families. And what they saw was American Indians living in tribes. They knew this could work. It could work. So when they set up the Mayflower Compact, there was no king. What they engaged in, and this is what makes it precious, they engaged in a social compact with each other to be mutually supportive in their organization of civil government to protect their rights and liberties. It was the Mayflower Compact that was the single most inspiration for our Declaration of Independence and Constitution. The Mayflower Compact was eliminated from the AP history framework released last year under the supervision of David Coleman. And I don't care how he tries to escape his responsibility in that, the buck stops with him, okay? So what we have then is an Anglo-Saxon ruler's law of divine right of kings contrasted with the Mayflower Compact. Under kings, you are subjects. Under a social compact, you are citizens. And that's a big, important difference. So when you start hearing government experts talk about the influence of John Locke on our Constitution, know that John Locke, if you go back and read his second treatise on government, and because I was thinking, so is this guy got the superior intellect where he figured out the best government for people? I go back and read the footnotes that he cited. It was the Bible. All right? And what he said about tyrants, he said that if his heirs, had there being no law of nature or positive law of God that determines which is the right heir in all cases that may arise, the right of succession, and consequently of bearing rule, could not have been certainly determined. He's saying that there was no divine right of kings, there was no succession of sons, the way England was practicing it, and if we were going to get out from under tyrants, we had to do it before we were enslaved first. So the Mayflower Compact is the first document that writes out equality of all human beings, and that idea had not been crystallized until that time, the Mayflower Compact. What Jefferson said then, that established the American mind. And he writes frequently about the American mind. George Washington Curtis was George Washington's grandson, all right, from the children he adopted from Martha Washington. And what Washington Curtis was saying is that he was expressing the Puritan principle. I mean, he was there, he lived it. That's where we have to get our best sources. The Puritan principle, in its essence, is simply individual freedom. What the Puritans wanted was a free state, a free church, and a free school. So a copyrighted private product couldn't be part of a free state. Do you understand what's going on here? The Pilgrims, why they have stood above all men for their idea of liberty, always asserted liberty under law, and that law was natural law. Know that the image of the Lord's dignity, do you see why we went back to Genesis? You're made in the image of God. The image of the Lord's dignity and authority, which the majesty beareth, is honorable in how mean person soever. What was unique in our American system, and what Jefferson set up, is the public school system was meant to educate all peoples in liberal arts. So regardless of your socioeconomic status, if you had that talent, if you were impressed with the image of God to become a leader in the government, then money shouldn't be standing in your way. That's why people paid taxes, was to raise up leadership wherever it was from whomever you are, because that's what it means to be in the image of God. Now, do you see this is the Democratic backdrop of the Democratic Convention? Do you see that even non-verbally, we're in conflict with our Judeo-Christian background and with the Greek humanism that is expressed there. Know that Jefferson wrote, we the people endowed by our Creator. I brought up the Greek philosophers who were trying to figure out the origin of man, because our founders knew that that was an option. They could have written that. They could have, because that discussion in literature was there, but they didn't. That is verification that they were coming from a Judeo-Christian framework in setting up our government. Now, where we are today, why we feel the conflict is Barack Obama deliberately leaves out Creator when he's speaking of inalienable rights. All right, and so we're not getting it wrong. We got it right. There's a nonverbal going on that says this is our fundamental transformation of America. So how it changed? The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. If you go back to the Anti-Federalist Papers, we have a writer, James Winthrop, who was saying if you centralize the government, then it is easily corruptible by very wealthy people who want to buy it. Okay, he said that in 1788. Has anything changed? Do you understand? That's why you have to study history. And that's why the thing that's most likely the way to transform history is to not teach it. All right? The No Child Left Behind Act, when it emphasized English language arts and math, pushed history to the side. And that's where the time got emphasized in schools for matters other than you learning about your heritage. Listen to this. These are the writings of the presidents. I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me and causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. As a result of war, corporations have been enthroned, and an era of corruption in high places will follow, and the money, the power of the country will endeavor to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until all wealth is aggregated in a few hands and the republic is destroyed. Do you know who said that? Abraham Lincoln. Because the wealth was beginning then. Here's another. I cannot with candor tell you that all is well with the world. Clouds of suspicion, tides of ill will and intolerance gather darkly in many places. For out of this modern civilization, economic royalists, going back to the whole king thing, economic royalists carved new dynasties, new kingdoms were built upon the concentration of control over material things. Through these uses of corporations, banks, and securities, all undreamed by the fathers, the whole structure of modern life was impressed into this royal service. It was natural and perhaps human that privileged princes of these new economic dynasties, thirsting for power, reached out for control over the government itself. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 1936. So do you see that Common Core, do you see that what is going on in this current administration has actually been building up for decades? Do you see the change of one president isn't going to change everything about this country? Because it's not the offices in Washington, D.C. that have to be changed, it's the people of America. Now, you have been undermined. There is no question. You have been duped. It is not that you have just been slovenly and you've been deceived just like the first deceiver. You will not die. Well, yes, you will. Unless you choose rightly. But know that it began in the 1930s, this all-out assault. And it was with the wealth holders. John D. Rockefeller said, I don't want a nation of thinkers, I want a nation of workers. Do you hear college and career ready? Well, first you change the definition of college. It's no longer 4 years of 2 years being liberal arts to groom leadership. It is about career training. All right? It's about creating that second tier of your society for work and letting the first tier have the liberal arts. Andrew Carnegie said, we shall have an ideal state in which the surplus wealth of a few becomes the property of many. And here's the kicker. Woodrow Wilson, we want one class of persons to have a liberal education, and we want another class of persons, a very much larger class of necessity in every society, to forego liberal arts education and fit themselves to perform specific manual tasks. So here's a president undoing what the greatest mind in American history, Thomas Jefferson, tried to put in place. He was an aristocrat, he was not an elitist. Get those two different. Because Jefferson tried to raise up everyone, and by the way, when they say he was a slaveholder, remind them he tried to file bills to have slavery eliminated in Virginia, okay? And so did George Washington. But they were in the South, and the South were all Englishmen who were loyal to the king, so their bills never got passed. And they were living in a culture they could not change in their lifetimes, okay? That is part of this legacy. No, they weren't perfect. No, they couldn't finish the job. But they passed the government on to the next generation to finish more of the work. It is never finished, never. But you must do your part in maintaining the freedom we have and pass on to the next generation the equipment to fight their battle. That's what it's about. So this cartoon is actually what it was carried by Paul Revere. And what it shows is the aristocracy of England forcing down the throat of America. And notice she is an American Indian, all right? We identified at that time, prior to the American Indian taking sides with the British in the American Revolution, know that Squanto and his friend Samoset were the agents of salvation for the starving pilgrims. We owe our establishment of this Puritan principle to the American Indians, who celebrated with those pilgrims the first Thanksgiving. But if you don't know the story of Squanto, you must read it. Because to me, he's the Joseph story of our North American times. He was taken into slavery. He was freed by friars who bought him out of slavery, educated him, sent him to England because his desire was to go back home. He learned English while waiting for the boat, came over here. When he finally got home, his tribe had been obliterated. But he was the agent of salvation for God's people, so that when the Puritans came here, and they didn't know how to farm the land of North America, someone who already spoke their language and did know the land came and said, let me show you how to do this. That is the miracle of America. That is hands God in establishing this country. Make no mistake, he used all of us, including the Irish. Okay? But the point is, all you have to do is relabel these people, and you've got the same story going on. You've got a wealthy aristocracy forcing down the throats of our American schools a product. For them, it was the East India tea. For us, it's Common Core. Forcing down our throats a product we never asked for, we don't want. All right? But you've got people who are going to profit financially from this. And so it's history repeating itself. In 1934, how did we get here? Remember I told you these 1930s, things are going on. So the American Historical Association releases conclusions and recommendations of that commission about what to do with social studies in America. And what they talk about is a cumulative evidence supports the conclusion the United States, as in other countries, the age of individualism and laissez-faire in economy and government is closing, and a new age of collectivism is emerging. Okay, Barack Obama didn't think of this himself, just like Darwin didn't think of evolution. Okay, so this evolution that's going on is actually truly man trying to impose himself as God, and determining collectivism is going to be emerging through centralized ownership, social justice, and by the way, that term is in Plato's Republic, and equalization of opportunity, the support of education to be shifted more and more from the locality to the state. So if you're taken by surprise, it's because you didn't read the books from the 1930s. Similarly, since the family cannot provide for its immature members, did you get that? This is in direct contrast to the fifth commandment. Honor your father and mother so that I can bless you in the land that I will give you. Who's the active agent there? God. My land that I will give you. But the criterion is you honor your father and your mother, not your fatherland and motherland. Okay? That's a whole different source of power. Similarly, the father cannot provide his immature, commensurate with the need and possibility, democracy to guarantee such security and opportunity from early childhood to the age at which employment is possible. What's our term for that? Cradle to grave, right? And we're going to take care of you for college and career. The ideal should be applied to all regardless of residence. They're being very generous there. Completely integrated national system to be set by grave dangers involving over-standardization, regimentation, and discouragement of local initiative and experimentation. They said that was the danger. If we move too fast, they'll catch on. So if you want to understand how this came to be, how was this so orchestrated, you really must read A Choice, Not an Echo. Because what Phyllis Schlafly describes is how the kingmakers select the candidate that's going to be put before you by the parties to continue this agenda so that they can profit from the American tax dollars into their coffers. It's 30 years is covered here, and it's more than I have time, so read the book. It's out there, as a matter of fact. I've seen it at a vendor's table. Know that in 1992, this gentleman, Mark Tucker, wrote a letter to Dear Hillary, and that's what it's called, the Dear Hillary letter. You can find this on the Eagle Forum website. We think the great opportunity you have is to remold the entire American system for human resource development. So do you understand, once again, the liberal arts education to make you self-governing, to have your own choice of your career path, your fulfillment, to be a child of God and to develop in His will is not what the government has in mind, and it hasn't been. Since the Clinton era, and Hillary, make no mistake, she can't claim she didn't know. She was sitting on Mark Tucker's board, all right? National Center for Education and the Economy. She just keeps quiet about a lot of stuff, but we have her number. A seamless web of opportunities to develop one's skills that literally extends from cradle to grave, beginning in the home with the very young. That's what all this government early childhood stuff is about. If it were me and I had mothers in distress, I'd be helping the mothers to become better parents. But no, the government wants to standardize the input into your children, and that's what's going to happen if we don't wake up. So, the way it is and how to fix it. Remember that you are made in the image of God. That will never, ever change. You just have to figure it out. Amen. All right? And so, this Irish in me, you know, I'm really quite sensible, but you get me riled because you're taking away my liberty, and I will fight. So how do we deal with these corporate royals that lobby today? That's where they are. They're hiding in the non-governmental organizations in Washington, D.C., funneling their money into these NGOs, writing policy there, and sending it to our legislators to make into law. It includes the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Center on Education and the Economy. That's Mark Tucker, that's his organization. And by the way, he sat on the English Language Arts Feedback Committee. That is how tied this is with the 1990s and the outcome-based education from that time. The National Governors Association, the Council of Chief State School Officers, the National Association of State Boards of Ed, the Education Commission of the States, publishers, testing, and data companies. They're all in on this. The number one private funder then is Bill Gates. All right? And Bill Gates, if you go look at the partners, the funders of the National Governors Association and CCSSO, you'll find him. You will also find him making donations to Jeb Bush's Foundations for Excellence in Education. So these lobbyists then get to the Capitol, and policy is made, which is exported from the Department of Education to your state capitals through your governors and your commissioners of education. And they not only lobby in Washington, they also send their lobbyists to your state capital. So if you think you don't have the time, trust me, you make the time, because if you're not there, there is a vacuum they are very willing to fill. And that's what's been going on. So then they also have control of your local school boards and your superintendents. The Eli Broad has another wealthy man, has an academy for superintendents to teach them how to treat schools like businesses. So they destabilize the schools to create a different agenda other than what local control and what parents want. All right? So you can see the direction of influence there. This is Chester Finn from the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. They are the mouthpiece for Common Core. They are underwritten by Bill Gates. Know that Chester Finn, who is the chief executive there, he's now emeritus, but he was there. He liked the idea of this college readiness for kids, but he just wrote almost, I mean, we're still trying to figure out what the secondary agenda is here. But he says, what if college ready no longer means that you actually have to be prepared to succeed in a college-bearing college course, credit-bearing college course? He just wrote this last week. We've been saying it for 3 years. Common Core will not prepare you for a credit-bearing college course. And now, the very reformer who set this whole thing up, and he's been doing it for decades, is saying it's not working. Well, thanks for that. There never were any data saying it would work. Never were. And the other guy behind this is Lou Gerstner, former CEO of IBM. All right? He wrote a book called Entrepreneurship and Education, and espousing on how we need to centralize education. So I got the book thinking, if you're demanding of us data for data-based decision-making so that we can be accountable and responsible, surely you will have data in that book saying this works. I bought the book. There's no data. We are Americans in distress. This is another cartoon from the 1700s. What that character is holding in his hand while he's caged and having fish force-fed into his mouth is a piece of scripture asking God for mercy and liberty. All right? So I'm saying we're not in a different position, but we are going to have to do the same things. There's a mysterious cycle in human events. To some generations, much is given, of other generations, much is expected. This generation of Americans has a rendezvous with destiny. Who said that? Reagan said it, but remember, Reagan was a Democrat at one time. It was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Americans' destiny is to choose. This is from an Englishman watching us from the EU. My time is up, but I'm going to finish this because Daniel Hannan is excellent. This generation, like any generation, is entitled to opt for a different model of government, to embrace state intervention, higher taxes, federal czars, government regulation. But have no doubt about the consequences. Changing America to a different country will mean abandoning the vision of your founders. It will mean betraying your ancestors and disinheriting your posterity. We can't have that. We can't have that. If you ask me for my PowerPoint, I will send it to you. What I want you to know is this. I have a whole list of the strategies they used in the American Revolution to spread the word and poke it in the eye of the British. Thank you. The British came around. They're with us now, okay? And if you ask me for this PowerPoint, I will send it to you. You can have the list, and you can bring around our opposition too. Thank you so much.
How do you give the hook to someone who's giving you such great information? That's just amazing. Thank you, Dr. Byrne. Thank you for coming out. Next time we'll give you 4 hours.